Smile for the camera, Evelyn, my daughter-in-law said as she lifted the crystal punch bowl with both hands, her bright white smile glowing beneath the wedding lights. This is going to be unforgettable. And she was right. It became the moment that destroyed her entire life. I stood in the center of the reception ballroom, wearing a cream-colored silk dress I had spent 3 months searching for. At 67 years old, I no longer cared much about fashion, but this was my granddaughter Olivia's wedding day, and I wanted to look elegant for her. The ballroom at the Grand Monarch Hotel shimmered with gold candlelight and soft violin music. White roses hung from towering floral arrangements nearly 6 feet tall. Crystal chandeliers reflected against polished marble floors, while servers in black tuxedos carried trays of champagne through the crowd. It looked like something out of a bridal magazine. And in many ways, it should have. I had paid for almost all of it. The live string quartet near the staircase played softly while guests laughed beneath strands of warm hanging lights. Olivia looked beautiful in her lace gown, her eyes glassy with nervous happiness as she danced with my son Michael for the father-daughter dance. Watching them together should have filled my heart completely. Instead, I felt something colder sitting quietly beneath my ribs all evening. Vanessa had been acting strangely since the ceremony began. Too cheerful, too loud. Every smile looked rehearsed. Every laugh felt sharp around the edges. She floated around the ballroom in her pale blue designer gown, greeting guests as though she owned the entire evening. Technically, she probably believed she did. Earlier that afternoon, I had noticed my name missing from the printed wedding program beneath the section labeled Family Contributions. Vanessa quickly brushed it off as a printing mistake. Then during dinner, my assigned seat had somehow ended up beside the kitchen doors instead of near the family table. Another accident. By dessert, I stopped believing in accidents. Mom, don't overthink things, Michael whispered earlier when I quietly asked about the seating chart. He wouldn't meet my eyes when he said it. That hurt more than I expected. My son used to defend me over the smallest things. Now he sounded tired whenever Vanessa was involved, like disagreeing with her simply cost too much energy. I stood near the dance floor holding a champagne flute I barely touched while watching Olivia laugh with her bridesmaids. Across the room, Vanessa suddenly turned toward me carrying a giant crystal bowl filled with dark red sangria. Nearly 2 liters of it sloshed against the glass as she approached. Several guests noticed immediately and began watching with curious smiles. Evelyn, Vanessa called loudly enough to turn heads. We forgot the family wedding prank. A few people laughed uncertainly. I felt my stomach tighten. What prank? I asked quietly. Vanessa grinned wider. Oh, come on, don't act shy now. Before I could step back, she tilted the bowl forward. Cold red liquid crashed across my chest and shoulders in one heavy wave. The silk dress clung instantly to my skin. Sangria dripped down my sleeves, splashed across my pearls, and pooled onto the marble floor beneath me. Someone gasped. Someone else laughed nervously. The violin music continued playing as though nothing had happened. I stood completely still while the sweet smell of wine and fruit filled the air around me. The ballroom suddenly felt very quiet despite hundreds of people standing there. Vanessa covered her mouth dramatically like she could barely contain her laughter. Oh my God, she said between giggles. I can't believe I actually did it. Several guests forced awkward smiles. A bridesmaid pulled out her phone. Across the room, I saw Michael freeze beside the bar, his face pale with embarrassment. But he didn't move. Not toward me. Not toward her. Nobody moved. The cold sangria slowly dripped from my fingertips onto the floor, while flashes from the wedding photographer's camera lit the room. I looked directly at Vanessa then. Really looked at her. Not the polished smile she showed strangers. Not the charming woman she pretended to be online. I saw satisfaction in her eyes. Relief. Like she had been waiting months for this exact moment. Maybe longer. And suddenly, standing there soaked in dark red wine in the middle of the wedding ballroom I helped pay for, I understood something very clearly. This wasn't a prank. This was humiliation carefully wrapped in a smile. Vanessa leaned closer and lowered her voice just enough so only I could hear her. Now everyone can finally stop pretending you belong at the center of this family. For one long second, all I heard was the sound of liquid dripping onto marble. Then I smiled softly, adjusted the soaked sleeve of my dress, and looked her directly in the eye. Thank you, Vanessa, I said calmly. Now everyone can finally see who you really are. Nobody rushed to help me clean the dress. That was the part one remembered most afterward. Not the cold sangria soaking through silk. Not the sticky fruit sliding down my sleeves. It was the silence. Hundreds of people standing beneath crystal chandeliers pretending not to notice while I stood there drenched in humiliation. One of the hotel staff finally approached with a stack of white towels, her face flushed with secondhand embarrassment. "Mrs. Harper, let me help you," she whispered softly. I thanked her and dabbed carefully at the front of my dress, while Vanessa laughed with two bridesmaids near the champagne tower as though nothing unusual had happened. The reception music started up again. Conversations slowly returned. Human beings have a remarkable ability to ignore cruelty when it happens in expensive rooms. I excused myself quietly and walked toward the women's restroom at the far end of the ballroom hallway. My heels clicked against polished marble floors while damp fabric clung heavily to my legs. Halfway there, I passed a large framed mirror near the staircase landing. For a moment, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. My silver hair was still neatly pinned. My pearl earrings still rested perfectly against my neck. But dark red stains spread across my cream dress like bruises. I looked exhausted. Older than 67. Older than I had felt that morning when I carefully buttoned this dress in my hotel suite while thinking about how proud my late husband would have been to see Olivia get married. Daniel used to tell me I carried myself with dignity no matter what happened around me. Grace confuses cruel people, he once said after a difficult Thanksgiving years ago when Vanessa made one of her little comments about my age in front of guests. At the time, I brushed it aside. I brushed everything aside back then. The restroom was empty except for a young attendant folding hand towels near the counter. Her eyes widened when she saw the stains covering my dress. "Oh, honey," she murmured sympathetically. I smiled politely and assured her I was fine even though I could still feel the cold wine against my skin. I locked myself inside the largest stall and sat down carefully on the closed toilet lid. For the first time all evening, the noise disappeared. No violins. No laughter. No champagne glasses clinking together. Just silence and the faint sound of air conditioning humming overhead. I stared at the dark stains on my dress for a very long time. Then I started thinking about the wedding bills sitting in my filing cabinet back home. $42,000 for the ballroom reservation. $11,000 for floral arrangements Vanessa insisted had to be imported from California vineyards. $8,000 for custom ice sculptures nobody would even remember tomorrow morning. I paid for all of it. Not because anyone demanded it directly, but because every conversation somehow ended with Vanessa sighing about budgets while Olivia looked guilty for wanting her dream wedding. So I sold my lake cabin in Maine last spring. The cabin Daniel and I spent 20 summers restoring by hand. I told everyone I was ready to let it go. The truth was simpler. I wanted my granddaughter to have one beautiful day. My chest tightened suddenly at the memory of handing over the final cashier's check 3 months earlier while Vanessa hugged me tightly and called me the heart of this family. Strange how quickly people change once they believe they no longer need you. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. "Mrs. Harper?" a nervous voice asked from outside the stall. "There is someone asking for you." I opened the door slowly. The restroom attendant looked uncomfortable. "It is the wedding coordinator," she explained quietly. She said it is important. When I stepped into the hallway, the young coordinator stood there clutching an electronic tablet tightly against her chest. Her face looked pale. "Mrs. Harper," she said carefully, glancing over her shoulder toward the ballroom entrance. "I think there is something you need to see before the night is over." The wedding coordinator introduced herself as Rachel Bennett, though I barely processed her name at first. She looked no older than 28, with nervous eyes and trembling hands that kept tightening around the tablet pressed against her chest. Behind us, the ballroom doors opened and closed while muffled laughter drifted through the hallway. The reception had fully recovered from my humiliation, or at least everyone was pretending it had. Rachel glanced toward the ballroom entrance again before lowering her voice. "Mrs. Harper, I do not think what happened out there was spontaneous." I studied her carefully without speaking. She swallowed hard. "There is a private bridal preparation room upstairs. Earlier tonight, one of the assistants accidentally synced rehearsal footage onto the reception media server. I was checking the video queue when I found something strange. My stomach tightened slowly. Rachel unlocked the tablet screen and hesitated for a second, like she was debating whether she should really continue. Then she turned the screen toward me. The footage was grainy security video from earlier that afternoon. Vanessa stood inside the upstairs bridal suite wearing a silk robe while two bridesmaids sat nearby drinking champagne. I immediately recognized the crystal punch bowl sitting on the makeup counter beside her. My hands became very still. "Watch," Rachel whispered. Vanessa laughed on the screen while lifting the empty bowl with both hands. No, the angle has to look accidental," she said casually. One bridesmaid giggled. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Vanessa rolled her eyes dramatically. "Please. Evelyn has spent 20 years acting like the queen of this family. Tonight, everybody finally sees where she belongs." The room around me suddenly felt colder. On screen, Vanessa practiced, tilting the bowl forward. "I swear, the stain will look amazing on that ugly cream dress." More laughter followed. One of the bridesmaids asked, "What if Michael gets upset?" Vanessa smirked while pouring water from a pitcher into the bowl for practice. "Michael never does anything." Then she added the sentence that stayed with me long after the video ended. "People like Evelyn only have power because everyone pretends to respect them." Rachel paused the footage. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Somewhere downstairs, guests applauded loudly after what sounded like another toast. The wedding continued moving forward while I stood frozen in that quiet hallway holding evidence that my humiliation had been carefully rehearsed hours in advance. "I am so sorry," Rachel said softly. "I did not know whether I should show you." I looked down at the dark wine stains still drying across my dress. Suddenly, the entire evening made perfect sense. The missing name from the wedding program. The seating chart near the kitchen. The little comments disguised as jokes over the past 3 years. Vanessa had been slowly shrinking my place inside this family piece by piece until tonight, when she finally decided to do it publicly. And the worst part was not even Vanessa herself. It was how familiar this feeling had become. I remembered Christmas dinner 2 years ago when Vanessa forgot to save me a seat beside the family table. I remembered Olivia's college graduation when every family photograph somehow happened while I was parking the car. I remembered Michael asking me gently not to overreact whenever Vanessa crossed another line. Small humiliations, quiet exclusions, tiny little cuts spread out across years until eventually they stopped looking accidental. Rachel shifted nervously beside me. "There is something else," she admitted quietly. She tapped the screen again and opened another short clip from the bridal suite. Vanessa sat on the couch, this time scrolling through her phone while one bridesmaid asked if the wedding bills had finally been paid off. Vanessa laughed without even looking up. "Please. Evelyn paid for almost everything. That woman is basically our retirement plan." The bridesmaids laughed again. My chest tightened, but not from sadness anymore. Something colder settled inside me instead. Something calm. Rachel looked horrified watching my expression change. "Mrs. Harper?" she asked carefully. I handed the tablet back to her with perfectly steady hands. Then I smiled politely. "Rachel," I said softly, "could you do me one favor tonight?" Rachel stared at me carefully, almost nervously, as though she expected tears or anger or some dramatic reaction people usually imagine when they hear the truth. Instead, I asked her for the ballroom schedule. "The speeches begin in 40 minutes, she explained quietly while pulling up the event timeline on her tablet. "Then the cake cutting after that." I nodded slowly. 40 minutes. Strange how an entire family could change in less than an hour. "I need you to make sure that rehearsal footage remains connected to the reception media system," I told her calmly. Her eyes widened immediately. "Mrs. Harper, are you certain?" I looked toward the ballroom doors where laughter still echoed beneath soft piano music. "Very." Rachel hesitated only a second before nodding. "I can do that." Then she lowered her voice further. "There is one more thing you should know. Earlier tonight, Vanessa specifically asked the livestream team to stay active during the reception because she said she wanted more online engagement for social media clips." A faint smile touched my lips before I could stop it. Vanessa always did enjoy an audience. "Thank you, Rachel," I said quietly. "You have been kinder to me tonight than some members of my own family." Her expression softened with genuine sympathy. "You did not deserve any of this." No, I did not. But standing there in that hallway with wine stains drying against my skin, I suddenly realized something important. I had spent years trying to earn kindness from people who already benefited from my silence. The moment I stopped protecting them, everything would change. I returned to my hotel suite upstairs alone. The room smelled faintly of gardenias from the bouquet Olivia sent earlier that morning with a handwritten card thanking me for helping create the perfect wedding day. I sat carefully at the vanity mirror and removed my pearl earrings one at a time while staring at my reflection. Age changes a woman slowly. You do not notice it day by day. Then one evening you catch your reflection beneath harsh hotel lighting and suddenly see every year at once. The soft lines around your mouth, the silver threaded through your hair, the exhaustion hidden beneath your smile. Vanessa liked to joke about my age whenever she thought I could not hear her. Evelyn still thinks it is 1995. She once laughed during Thanksgiving dinner while explaining social media trends to Olivia. Everyone chuckled politely. Even Michael. I laughed too back then because mothers are trained to keep peace inside their families, even when peace comes at their own expense. I opened the garment bag hanging beside the closet door and pulled out the second dress I packed for the weekend. Navy blue silk. Simple. Elegant. Daniel bought it for our 40th anniversary cruise to Alaska nearly 8 years ago. I remembered standing beside him on the ship deck wrapped in a wool coat, while snow-covered mountains reflected across dark water. You know your problem? He asked me playfully that night while handing me a cup of hot chocolate. You keep giving people more chances than they deserve. I smiled sadly at the memory while fastening the navy dress carefully at my waist. Daniel saw people clearly, better than I ever did. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Mom. Michael's voice sounded hesitant from outside the suite door. I closed my eyes briefly before opening it. He stood there looking uncomfortable in his tuxedo, his bow tie slightly loosened now. I wanted to check on you, he said quietly. Vanessa feels terrible about what happened. The lie settled heavily between us. I studied my son carefully. The same blue eyes Daniel had. The same nervous habit of rubbing his wedding band when avoiding difficult conversations. Does she? I asked softly. Michael sighed. Mom, it was just supposed to be harmless fun. Harmless. I repeated that word silently inside my head while remembering Vanessa practicing my humiliation. Upstairs hours earlier. Did Olivia know? I asked suddenly. Michael looked genuinely confused. Know what? For the first time all evening, I believed him. My granddaughter was innocent in this. Relief mixed painfully with disappointment inside my chest. Michael stepped closer. Can we please just move on from this tonight? It is Olivia's wedding. I looked at my son for a long moment. Then I nodded gently. You are right, I said calmly. Tonight should be memorable for everyone. He smiled with visible relief, completely misunderstanding the meaning behind my words. After he left, I walked slowly to the ballroom elevator wearing my navy silk dress and Daniel's diamond bracelet. Downstairs, applause erupted as the master of ceremonies announced the beginning of the family speeches. The ballroom looked even brighter when I returned downstairs. Candlelight reflected against crystal glasses while guests gathered near the dance floor waiting for the speeches to begin. Nobody would have guessed that less than an hour earlier, I had been standing in the same room soaked in red wine, while my daughter-in-law laughed in front of hundreds of people. That is the strange thing about elegant places. Humiliation disappears quickly beneath expensive lighting. The master of ceremonies adjusted his microphone, while servers carried fresh champagne to the tables. Vanessa stood near the head table beside Michael and Olivia, radiant in her pale blue gown, smiling as though she had personally invented happiness itself. When she noticed me entering the ballroom in my navy dress, surprise flashed briefly across her face. I almost enjoyed that moment. She expected me to leave, to cry upstairs, to disappear quietly so the evening could continue without discomfort. Instead, I walked calmly across the ballroom with my shoulders straight and Daniel's diamond bracelet shining beneath the chandeliers. Several guests complimented the new dress as I passed their tables. One elderly woman touched my arm gently and whispered, "You handled yourself beautifully earlier." I thanked her politely. Across the room, Vanessa leaned toward one of her bridesmaids and muttered something that made them both laugh softly behind raised champagne glasses. I no longer cared. That was the difference now. Earlier that evening, her cruelty embarrassed me. Now it simply revealed her. Olivia rushed toward me the moment she saw me approaching the family table. Her eyes looked worried beneath carefully applied wedding makeup. "Grandma, are you okay?" she asked quietly while taking both my hands. Genuine concern filled her voice, and suddenly my anger softened for just a second. Olivia had always been gentle. Even as a little girl, She cried whenever cartoons showed lonely people sitting by themselves. I am fine, sweetheart, I assured her softly. You look beautiful tonight. Tears briefly filled her eyes. I am so sorry about earlier. Vanessa said everybody was overreacting and that it was just a joke, but it did not feel funny. There it was again. The truth quietly trying to survive beneath manipulation. I squeezed her hands gently. Some people confuse cruelty with humor, I said. That is not your fault. Before Olivia could answer, Vanessa appeared beside us with perfect timing and an even more perfect smile. There you both are, she said brightly while slipping one manicured arm around Olivia's waist. The speeches are about to start. Her eyes moved toward me carefully, measuring, watching, trying to understand why I looked calm instead of broken. Evelyn, I love the dress change, she added sweetly. Very classy. Thank you, I replied politely. I thought tonight deserved something memorable. For one tiny second, her smile faltered. Then the master of ceremonies tapped the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced warmly, it is time for a few words from the people who helped shape Olivia and Brandon's beautiful journey together. Applause filled the ballroom. Vanessa relaxed instantly and returned to the head table beside Michael while Olivia joined her new husband near the center stage. Rachel stood discreetly near the audiovisual station across the room. When our eyes met briefly, she gave the smallest nod. Everything was ready. The first speeches began normally enough. Brandon's best man told embarrassing college stories that made the room laugh. Olivia's maid of honor cried halfway through her toast while describing childhood sleepovers and friendship bracelets. Michael spoke next. My son stood beneath warm stage lighting holding a glass of champagne while emotion thickened his voice. Olivia, he said, smiling proudly toward his daughter. Your mother and I are so proud of the woman you became. Your mother and I. Strange how quickly people rewrite history once they are comfortable. I sat quietly at the family table, listening while guests dabbed tears from their eyes. Michael thanked Vanessa publicly for organizing the perfect wedding weekend. The audience applauded warmly. Vanessa lowered her eyes modestly like an actress accepting an award she already expected to win. Then the master of ceremonies smiled toward my table. And now, he announced cheerfully, we would like to invite Evelyn Harper to say a few words. The entire ballroom turned toward me at once. Vanessa's smile widened confidently. She thought she understood exactly what came next. A graceful grandmother speech. A sentimental toast. Another moment where everyone pretended to be a happy family beneath expensive flowers and soft music. I stood slowly, smoothing the front of my navy silk dress while the ballroom applauded politely. Then I walked toward the stage carrying nothing except a small remote Rachel handed me moments earlier. I could feel every pair of eyes following me as I walked toward the stage. The ballroom had grown quieter now, the soft clinking of silverware fading beneath polite applause. Somewhere near the back of the room, a champagne cork popped loudly before the sound disappeared into silence. I stepped carefully onto the small platform beside the dance floor while warm stage lights settled across my face. The remote Rachel gave me rested lightly in my palm. Vanessa sat at the head table with one hand draped possessively across the back of Michael's chair, smiling with complete confidence. She thought she had already won tonight. That was the remarkable thing about cruel people. They mistake silence for surrender every single time. I adjusted the microphone gently. Good evening, everyone, I began softly. My voice sounded calm across the ballroom speakers. First, I would like to congratulate Olivia and Brandon. Tonight is beautiful, truly beautiful. Guests smiled warmly while Olivia reached for Brandon's hand beside the sweetheart table. Watching my granddaughter grow into such a kind and thoughtful young woman has been one of the greatest blessings of my life, I continued. And seeing all of you here tonight reminds me how important family moments really are. Vanessa relaxed visibly. I could almost see the relief settle into her shoulders. Around the room, guests returned to their wine glasses and dessert plates expecting another sentimental grandmother speech. You know, I said gently, people often believe family is built through grand gestures. Expensive weddings, beautiful photographs, public celebrations. I paused briefly while scanning the room. But I think family is actually revealed in much quieter moments. The small moments when nobody thinks they are being watched. The ballroom became still again. Vanessa's smile faded just slightly. Michael looked toward me with growing uncertainty. I continued softly. Tonight, I was reminded of something my late husband used to say. He believed character is not revealed by how people behave during easy moments. It is revealed by what they do when they think there will be no consequences. The room felt different now. Guests slowly lowered their forks. Even the servers paused near the walls holding silver trays against black tuxedos. I glanced once toward Rachel near the audiovisual station. She nodded almost invisibly. Earlier this evening, I continued calmly. Something happened that many people here probably considered harmless. Vanessa shifted in her chair. A joke. A prank. A little embarrassment during a celebration. I looked directly at her then. But sometimes the things we laugh at reveal far more than we intend. Michael straightened in his seat beside Vanessa now, confusion spreading across his face. Olivia looked nervous. The ballroom had become so quiet I could hear ice settling inside champagne glasses. I lifted the remote slightly in my hand. I almost decided to let it go, I admitted. After all, women my age are often expected to stay quiet, to avoid making others uncomfortable, to smile politely while dignity is slowly chipped away piece by piece. Several older guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. They understood exactly what I meant. But then someone showed me something important tonight. Vanessa's expression changed instantly. Not panic yet, but recognition. Her eyes flickered briefly toward the large projection screen hanging above the ballroom dance floor. Evelyn, she interrupted suddenly with a nervous laugh. Maybe this is not really the time for. I pressed the remote before she could finish speaking. The ballroom screen flickered softly. For one brief second, only static appeared. Then the bridal suite security footage filled the giant screen above the reception floor. Vanessa froze completely. On screen, she stood laughing beside the crystal punch bowl while her bridesmaids watched from the couch. No, no. Her recorded voice echoed clearly through the ballroom speakers. The angle has to look accidental. A collective gasp rolled through the room almost instantly. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Guests stared upward at the giant screen while Vanessa's face slowly lost all color. On screen, she practiced tilting the bowl forward while laughing. I swear, the stain will look amazing on that ugly cream dress. One bridesmaid asked nervously, "What if Michael gets upset?" Vanessa's recorded voice answered with cruel confidence. "Michael never does anything." Silence swallowed the ballroom completely. Even the string quartet had stopped playing. I looked slowly toward my son. Michael stared at the screen like he no longer recognized the woman sitting beside him. Vanessa suddenly stood so quickly her chair scraped harshly against the marble floor. "Turn that off," she snapped at Rachel across the room. But the video kept playing. People like Evelyn only have power because everyone pretends to respect them. Her recorded voice echoed through the ballroom one final time. The silence after the video ended felt heavier than any shouting ever could. Nobody in the ballroom seemed to know where to look. Some guests stared down into their wine glasses, while others remained frozen with open shock still written across their faces. The chandeliers above us continued glowing warmly as though the room itself had not just cracked open. Vanessa stood beside her overturned chair breathing hard, her cheeks flushed deep red now. "This is ridiculous," she snapped suddenly, forcing out a nervous laugh that sounded painfully unnatural in the silence. It was obviously a joke. Everybody jokes around before weddings. Nobody laughed with her this time. Michael slowly turned toward his wife with an expression I had not seen on my son's face since he was a little boy discovering somebody had lied to him for the first time. Genuine disbelief. "You planned that?" he asked quietly. Vanessa threw her hands into the air. "Oh my God, Michael, it was not that serious." But her voice sounded thinner now, less polished. The confidence she wore all evening had started slipping apart piece by piece. Olivia looked devastated. Her mascara shimmered beneath ballroom lights while she stared at the frozen image of Vanessa still displayed across the giant reception screen. "Mom," she whispered softly, "why would you say those things about Grandma?" Vanessa immediately turned toward her daughter with forced sweetness. "Honey, everybody says stupid things when they are stressed during wedding planning." Then her eyes snapped toward me sharply. And honestly, if Evelyn had not turned this into some public spectacle, none of this would even matter right now. There it was. Not remorse. Not shame. Only irritation that her performance had failed. I stood calmly at the microphone while guests shifted uncomfortably around the room. "You are right about one thing, Vanessa," I said quietly. This evening did become a spectacle. Vanessa crossed her arms defensively. You embarrassed yourself tonight, not me. A soft murmur moved through the crowd at those words. Even now, she still believed cruelty looked like strength. Michael stared at his wife in complete silence. I watched realization slowly settle across his face, like someone waking from a very long sleep. How long? He asked finally. Vanessa blinked. What? How long have you been talking about? My mother like that. His voice remained calm, but there was something different inside it now. Distance. Vanessa laughed nervously again. Michael, do not do this here. Answer me. The ballroom had become so quiet that every word carried sharply through the speakers overhead. Vanessa looked around the room searching for support and found none. Her bridesmaids suddenly seemed fascinated by the tablecloths in front of them. Everybody vents sometimes, she muttered defensively. You vent about people too. Michael looked physically ill now. He rubbed one hand across his mouth before glancing toward me, standing beneath the stage lights. For the first time in years, my son actually looked ashamed. Mom, he said quietly. I did not know. I believed him. That was the tragedy of it. Michael had not actively joined Vanessa's cruelty most of the time. He simply chose comfort over confrontation again and again until silence itself became betrayal. Olivia suddenly stood from her chair and walked directly toward me. Her wedding gown shimmered softly beneath the lights as tears rolled down her cheeks. Grandma, she whispered, wrapping her arms carefully around me. I am so sorry. I closed my eyes briefly while holding her. Across the ballroom, several guests looked emotional now. One elderly man quietly shook his head while his wife dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. Because deep down, almost everyone in that room recognized the truth. They had seen moments like this before inside their own families. Small humiliations disguised as jokes. Older relatives dismissed as inconvenient. Respect slowly replaced with tolerance. Vanessa suddenly pointed angrily toward Rachel near the audiovisual station. You had no right to show private footage. Rachel straightened nervously but remained silent. Actually, I replied calmly. The footage became public the moment you chose to humiliate someone in front of hundreds of guests. Vanessa looked at me with open hatred now. The polished charm was completely gone. You always thought you were better than me, she hissed quietly. No, I answered softly. I just expected basic kindness. That sentence seemed to hit harder than shouting ever could. Vanessa opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, another voice interrupted from near the ballroom entrance. I think this evening has revealed something much larger than a wedding prank. Every head turned immediately. An older man in a charcoal gray suit stood near the doorway holding a leather folder beneath one arm. Martin Doyle, Daniel's longtime attorney. And judging by the expression on Vanessa's face, she recognized him instantly. The moment Martin Doyle stepped into the ballroom, the entire atmosphere changed again. He carried himself with the calm confidence of a man who had spent 40 years walking into rooms where people suddenly became nervous the moment they saw him. His silver hair was neatly combed back, and the leather folder beneath his arm looked worn from years of use. Vanessa's expression tightened instantly. She knew exactly who he was because Daniel trusted Martin with everything long before he passed away. Martin, I said softly from the stage. He nodded politely toward me before turning his attention toward the guests gathered around the ballroom. I apologize for interrupting the reception, he began calmly. But after what was publicly displayed tonight, I believe there are legal matters that can no longer remain private. A nervous murmur moved through the room again. Vanessa laughed sharply, though the sound cracked slightly at the edges now. This is insane, she snapped. You cannot seriously be turning a wedding into some courtroom drama. Martin looked at her with measured professionalism. Mrs. Collins, your own recorded statements unfortunately created this situation. Michael stood slowly beside the head table. Martin, he said carefully, what legal matters? Martin opened the leather folder while the ballroom remained completely silent around him. Several years ago, he explained, Daniel Harper amended his estate documents with a specific protective clause concerning Mrs. Evelyn Harper. Vanessa's face lost even more color. I watched her eyes move quickly between Martin and me while panic slowly replaced arrogance. Your father, Martin continued while looking directly at Michael, became increasingly concerned about the treatment Evelyn was receiving within the family after his health began declining. Michael looked stunned. Dad never told me any of this. No, Martin replied quietly, because he hoped the clause would never become necessary. Olivia sat frozen beside Brandon now, clutching her husband's hand tightly while guests leaned forward listening. Even the hotel staff near the walls had stopped pretending not to pay attention. Martin removed several documents from the folder carefully. The amendment states that any direct beneficiary who intentionally humiliates, manipulates, or publicly degrades Evelyn Harper risks immediate suspension from the Harper Family Trust pending legal review. Vanessa let out a stunned laugh. That cannot possibly be enforceable. Actually, Martin answered calmly, it is very enforceable. Her breathing became visibly uneven now. This is because of one stupid prank, she demanded loudly. Martin's expression remained perfectly steady. No, Mrs. Collins. It is because tonight provided documented public evidence of prolonged malicious intent. The ballroom felt almost motionless. Somewhere near the back, I noticed guests quietly lowering their phones after realizing the livestream cameras were still active above the dance floor. Vanessa noticed too. Her eyes widened sharply as she glanced toward the suspended camera equipment. The livestream, she whispered. Rachel nodded carefully from the audiovisual station. It never stopped broadcasting. A ripple of shock moved across Vanessa's face. For the first time all evening, she looked genuinely frightened. Every cruel comment, every second of the footage, every reaction afterward. Hundreds of online viewers had already seen it unfold live. Vanessa turned desperately toward Michael now. You are seriously letting them do this to me? Michael looked exhausted. Older somehow. Do what, Vanessa? He asked quietly. Show people who you are. She stared at him in disbelief. After everything I have done for this family? That sentence hung heavily in the air because deep down everyone there understood the truth. Vanessa always viewed kindness as a transaction. Every favor came attached to expectation. Every smile demanded something in return. Martin closed the folder slowly. Effective immediately, he said professionally. All discretionary access connected to the Harper Trust has been temporarily frozen pending formal review. Vanessa blinked at him. What does that mean? It means, Martin replied carefully, that the vacation property purchase, the investment transfers, and the secondary home financing requests currently connected to your accounts will be suspended. Michael's head lifted sharply. Secondary home? Martin looked surprised briefly. You were unaware? Vanessa stepped forward quickly. Michael, do not listen to this right now. But Martin had already opened another document. Mrs. Collins submitted preliminary paperwork 3 months ago requesting trust-backed financing for a private property in Aspen under separate ownership conditions. Michael stared at his wife like a stranger standing across the room. You were buying another house? Vanessa's voice rose instantly. I was planning for our future. Without telling me. Olivia suddenly covered her mouth with trembling fingers while Brandon looked horrified beside her. Around the ballroom, guests exchanged stunned whispers. Piece by piece, the perfect image Vanessa built for years was collapsing beneath the same chandeliers where she once expected applause. I stood quietly at the edge of the stage watching it all unfold without satisfaction and without anger. Only clarity. Because in the end, cruel people rarely destroy themselves through one dramatic mistake. They destroy themselves slowly by believing they will never be exposed. The wedding ended less than an hour later, though nobody officially announced it. Guests began leaving quietly beneath the chandeliers, their polished shoes moving across marble floors in awkward silence, while servers cleared untouched slices of wedding cake from the tables. The string quartet packed away their instruments without speaking. Even the flowers suddenly looked tired to me. Olivia cried softly in Brandon's arms near the ballroom entrance while relatives hugged her one by one, whispering apologies for a night none of them would ever forget. Vanessa disappeared shortly after Martin revealed the financial documents. One moment she stood near the head table arguing desperately with Michael in harsh whispers, and the next she was gone. No dramatic exit. No final speech. Just absence. Somehow that felt fitting. Cruel people often leave quietly once their audience stops applauding. I remained near the ballroom windows watching rain begin tapping softly against the glass outside. The city lights blurred beneath the storm while hotel staff folded linen napkins around us. Michael approached me slowly sometime after midnight. He looked exhausted. His tuxedo jacket hung over one shoulder now, and his tie had been loosened completely. For a moment, he reminded me painfully of Daniel after long workdays years ago. "Mom," he said quietly. I turned toward him without speaking. He struggled for words longer than I expected. I do not even know where to begin. Neither did I, because some damage does not arrive all at once. It arrives slowly through years of silence, avoidance, and choosing convenience over courage until eventually two people who love each other barely recognize the distance between them. Michael rubbed both hands across his face tiredly. "I should have seen it," he admitted finally. "There were signs. So many signs." I nodded softly. "Yes." That single word seemed to hurt him more than anger would have. "Why did you never tell me how bad it had become?" he asked quietly. I looked back toward the rain-covered windows before answering. "Because every time I tried, you asked me to keep the peace." Michael lowered his head immediately. Deep down, he knew it was true. For years he mistook neutrality for kindness, while Vanessa slowly pushed boundaries further and further. Small humiliations, little exclusions, tiny dismissals that seemed too insignificant to confront individually, until one day they became impossible to ignore. "I failed you," he whispered. The honesty in his voice nearly broke my heart. "You failed yourself too," I answered gently. "Because loving someone should never require pretending not to see who they are." Michael sat heavily in one of the empty ballroom chairs nearby while rain continued falling outside. "She already left the hotel," he said after a long silence. "She took a car to the airport." I was not surprised. Vanessa always preferred escaping consequences over facing them. She said everybody turned against her because of one mistake. I looked at him carefully then. "Do you believe that?" Michael stared down at the polished marble floor for several seconds before shaking his head slowly. "No." That simple answer carried years of realization inside it. Nearby, Olivia approached us quietly, still wearing her wedding gown, though her makeup had faded now beneath tears and exhaustion. She sat beside me carefully and rested her head against my shoulder exactly the way she used to as a little girl after nightmares. "I am sorry my wedding became this," she whispered. I kissed the top of her head softly. "Your wedding revealed the truth," I told her gently. "That is painful, but it is not the same thing." We sat together listening to rain and distant elevator chimes while hotel workers dismantled the reception around us piece by piece. Strange how quickly beautiful things disappear once the night ends. 1 month later, the videos from the wedding had faded from social media headlines, replaced by newer scandals and newer gossip. Vanessa and Michael quietly separated after financial investigations uncovered several hidden accounts connected to trust funds she attempted to access without disclosure. Martin handled everything professionally. Olivia and Brandon postponed their honeymoon and instead spent weekends visiting me at my new home along the Maine coastline. Smaller than the old lake cabin I sold, but peaceful, very peaceful. One cold October morning, Michael arrived alone carrying a paper bag filled with fresh blueberry muffins from the bakery Daniel used to love. We sat on the porch overlooking gray Atlantic water while autumn wind moved through the trees around us. "I do not expect forgiveness overnight," he said quietly, "but I would like to earn my way back into your life if you let me." I looked at my son for a very long moment. Then I poured him another cup of coffee. Some relationships shatter completely. Others survive, but only after the truth finally clears away everything false surrounding them. As for Vanessa, I heard she moved to Arizona shortly after the separation became public. Occasionally someone sends me gossip about her online complaints and bitter posts about betrayal. I never respond, because in the end, revenge was never really the point. Peace was, and some stains never come out no matter how expensive the dress becomes.